Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. I'm answering your listener questions today. Should your first ever rental property be an owner-occupied four-plex in your own hometown or an out-of-market turnkey investment? If I could start all over again in real estate myself, what would I do differently? And then finally, I've got something rather serious and sad to tell you about, and every investor can learn a substantial lesson from this tragedy that I experienced myself today on Get Rich Education. MC Lobsher is the host of the Cashflow Ninja podcast and president of Producers Wealth. He is on a mission to help you achieve financial independence and freedom as soon as possible. He achieves this by integrating the infinite banking concept with real estate investments to increase your returns and recapture cash flow that you are not even aware of that you're losing. MC shares the number one strategy of investors in his holistic wealth creation course at yourownbankingsystem.com.
Would you like to know the easiest way to create wealth and passive income with real estate? This is Marco Santarelli with Norada Real Estate Investments. Now you can access the best deals without the stress or hassle of having to find, renovate, or manage those properties. We save you time by providing you with passive income investment properties in some of the best U.S. markets. Learn more by downloading your free copy of The Ultimate Guide to Passive Real Estate Investing. There's no obligation and nothing to buy. Simply visit passiverealestateguide.com and get your free copy today. That's passiverealestateguide.com.
Get Rich Education is brought to you by Ridge Lending Group, Producers Wealth, Norada Real Estate, and Total Control Financial.
You're listening to the show that has created more passive income for people than nearly any show in the world. This is the powerful Get Rich Education.
Hey, you're inside GRE. From Inglewood, Ontario, Canada to Inglewood, California, and across 188 nations worldwide, I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education, and you and I are back together again to build your wealth with your listener questions today. Then later, I'll tell you about a disaster that I suffered that damaged my psyche and my real estate and the investing lessons that you can learn from it no matter where you live. The first question comes from Henry in McAllen, Texas. Henry listens to Get Rich Education on Spotify. Henry writes, first off, a big thank you for all you do in educating others and helping with valuable advice and knowledge they can act on immediately that will lead them to greater wealth. My question, I'm about to be a first-time real estate investor, but I'm stuck in deciding whether to make my first move and go for an owner-occupied fourplex or instead a turnkey investment property. I am currently a renter in a 3-bed, 2-bath home with a 2-car garage and a nice backyard. Okay, so he's living comfortably as a renter now. Henry goes on to say, I am 33 years old, have a wife and 2 kids. I know getting into a fourplex would greatly diminish our current lifestyle, but I am willing to live in a fourplex for the owner-occupied requirement of 12 months if I have to, or would you recommend my first investment to be a single-family turnkey property using one of your recommended providers and keep building from there, one single-family house at a time? I'm thinking about economies of scale, and I feel that acquiring the fourplex would get me closer to building my wealth the fastest. What do you think, Keith? Which route would you go if you were in my shoes? All right, well, thank you for the question, Henry. The short answer is that if the fourplex situation works in McAllen, Texas, then start by doing that. If it doesn't, start with an out-of-market turnkey single-family home. Now, I'll tell you what I mean when I say if the fourplex situation works in McAllen, Texas. Now, I don't know the McAllen market. I know where it's located, pretty far south in Texas, near the international border. The fourplex versus the out-of-market turnkey single-family home is really a matter of pros and cons. So let's discuss these and I'll let you decide. The advantages of you buying the fourplex, living in one of the units for at least 12 months, which is a requirement of FHA 3.5% down financing or 0% down VA financing, is that you have 3 rent incomes. And then when you vacate after your owner occupancy period, of course, you'll have 4 rent incomes. Understand that your 3.5% down payment means you have 28-to-1 leverage. That's pretty awesome if prices keep appreciating. Now, some more positives of the four-plex are that if you live there 12 plus months, this is an advantage that a lot of people fail to consider. It's that you'll also be able to use those 4 rent incomes on your mortgage application toward qualifying for a better single-family home down the road than you could have had you not gone through the four-plex first, and instead had just tried to buy your first primary residence without going through the four-plex. Also, in the four-plex, your economies of scale could very well provide you with a cap rate or cash-on-cash return that trumps a single-family turnkey home. Maybe, maybe not. If the four-plex were rented to 4 tenants and its monthly rent income there in McAllen, if that number is close to 1% of the purchase price, then that's a good sign for you, Henry. For example, if you can get $5,000 in total monthly rents on a $500,000 purchase price four-plex, you will probably have positive cash flow. Now, if it's a little under 1%, it would probably work too, but not too much under a 1% rent-to-value ratio. And that's because most Texas jurisdictions have higher property taxes. Another positive of going with the fourplex is that you're going to be able to lock up a larger loan amount at today's low interest rates. Yes, interest rates aren't as low as they were a year or two ago, but real estate is a long-term game and interest rates are still a full 2 to 3% below their historic long-term average. Get good debt with whatever you do. You might be able to lock up, say, $500,000 of cheap fixed interest rate debt with the fourplex. Texas has pretty favorable landlord-tenant law for real estate investors. If you were in California or most other coastal states, I might just say forget it because the law tilts against you and toward the tenant. Now, let's flip this around and talk about the downsides to buying the owner-occupied fourplex and the upsides to buying an out-of-market turnkey single-family home as your first rental property ever, Henry. The number one reason, it's actually probably not financial, it's that you won't have to move. You can keep being a renter in your own home, which often makes more financial sense than society thinks, and rent out your investor advantage single-family home to someone else, and you own that rental in Indiana or Tampa or Birmingham or Huntsville, Alabama, or St. Louis or Cleveland or Jacksonville, somewhere that's investor advantage. Moving is stressful and expensive, and most people overlook just how stressful and expensive the act of physically moving addresses is until they're in the middle of a move, and then it's too late to go back. Moving will almost certainly strain a marriage and ravage your family's life for a while. And here's the thing, if you move out of the home that you're currently renting from someone else now, and then you buy the fourplex and you reside in it for only 12 months before you move again, then that means you'll have to move twice in 1 year or twice in 2 years. You'll have to move twice, bookending however long your fourplex owner-occupied period ends up being. The next reason that tilts toward buying a single-family home is that you'll likely maintain a better quality of life in your 3-2 rental than 1 unit of a fourplex. As you already know, because you did indicate in your question that you're willing to live the fourplex life for a while and make that sacrifice, I'll just ask, is your wife on board with that? Is she okay with that? See, not all fourplexes are apartment style with a common area. Some are townhouse style, where everyone has their own separate entrance to the outdoors, and some even have individual garages, so you don't always have to sacrifice that much lifestyle, but it can get more difficult to find a fourplex where you're not sacrificing lifestyle. Another consideration is that you need a fourplex in an area where the tenants are decent enough to respect the property and pay the rent on time. This is really what I meant earlier on when I said if a fourplex situation works there. And determining this yourself can be fuzzy. If you can't get a good feel enough for this yourself, then you need to ask a local property manager about this, not an agent, and see how a property manager would feel about operating that building themselves. Agents are commission driven and they want the sale. They're going to want you to buy it. This definitely does not mean that all agents are bad, but we just have some that are incentivized toward prompting transactions rather than your best interests. Whether or not your property and neighborhood can attract a respectful four-plex tenant has to do with a lot of factors. One of them might be the age of the property or the neighborhood. Some cities, and I live in one of them, are dominated by 40-year-old cookie-cutter fourplexes, some in better areas than others. I could not get my younger brother to get started with the fourplex thing like I did, by the way, because where he lives in Las Vegas, he said that he didn't feel he could attract the right tenants in a fourplex. Another advantage of going the single-family turnkey route is that you don't have to be a property manager at all, like you probably do in the fourplex. Managing tenants that live in the same building as you brings about its own set of both benefits and difficulties. I would know. That's how I started. Another item is that if McAllen, Texas's economy becomes fragile, well, you might have the benefit of being diversified into a different, larger metro because most turnkey markets are larger with better diversified economies than a place the size of McAllen, although I know McAllen is not a tiny podunk town. Another advantage of going the turnkey route is that once you get into income properties and give it a try, if after a while you just somehow decide that real estate investing is not the thing for you, well, I would advise you to stay the course. But if it's really not for you, you know what? It is easier for you to sell a turnkey single-family home than it is a fourplex. That's because you can sell your single-family home to an everyday primary residence dweller, but to sell a fourplex, you need to find an investor. Single-family turnkeys are more liquid. And then one last thing to consider, Henry, is that a turnkey single-family home is a passive investment, and an owner-occupied fourplex is an active investment. When you're living at the fourplex, you'll often be telling yourself, yeah, here I go, working for my passive income again. So, great question, Henry. If you reach back, I devote Get Rich Education podcast episodes 44 and 45 to my life in an owner-occupied fourplex. I even tell you some of the exact sentences that I used to motivate tenants to pay the rent on time and a bunch of street smart tactics in those earlier episodes. You can easily remember the fourplex episode because it's number 44. I did that for a reason. By the way, if you want to buy a fourplex with a conventional loan and don't plan to occupy it at all, expect to have to make a 25% minimum down payment. The next question is from Simon in Manchester, England. He writes a shorter question. Keith, if there's just one thing that I would want to know, it's if you could start all over again in real estate today, what would you do differently? Thanks for the question, Simon. That's a short question and a great one. And I appreciate our listeners in Great Britain. UK listeners make up more than 1% of Get Rich Education listenership. Awesome. You see, I like to ask old timers this same question. Talk to the oldest people at your next real estate investor meetup and ask them, if you could start all over again, what would you do differently in real estate? And just listen. Simon, I would have done 3 things differently. Bought more, bought sooner, and not self-managed for so long. I self-managed 5.5 years. And looking back, I would have learned pretty much all the self-management lessons that I would have needed to know in just 1 to 2 years. As far as the I wish I would have bought more and I wish I would have bought sooner mindset, I just like to ask you, Simon, in 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years, do you think real estate will be priced for substantially more than it is today? I think for you and me and most everyone, the answer is yes. So in 30 years, rather than being that old timer that says you wish you would have bought more 30 years ago, control your destiny and buy more today. Because in 30 years ago is today. Now, one of the best things that I ever did was make my first ever real estate owned of any kind, that owner-occupied fourplex building, because I was able to buy it in an area where tenants would respect the property and pay the rent, and I was able to buy it in an area of lower property taxes. I was even able to get a good interest rate on it. Somehow, I do still remember my mortgage interest rate was 6 3/8% at the time in 2002, which I would submit to you is still a historically low interest rate. It just doesn't feel like it because of where we've been the last 10 years. Now, I also happened to buy that four-plex for $295,000, and all four doors would have rented. Remember, I lived in one unit, but all four had a combined market rent of $2,900. So there was basically the 1% rent to price ratio. I just didn't even know about that rent to price or rent to value ratio metric at the time. And like I've told you before, I owned a fourplex for a while before I even knew what words like cash flow and equity even meant. That is definitely an example of how sometimes it's best to start before you're 100% ready. Hey, history is on the side of make it happen action takers. And I'll tell you that in life, as soon as everybody else starts doing something, then by that time, I've probably lost interest. People spend the early part of their lives and their adolescence trying to fit in, but successful adults don't try to fit in, they try to stand out. So ask yourself, what are you doing that really stands out? Thanks for the question, Simon. Now, although I took action by starting fairly big with the fourplex, you know what some people say? You got lucky, Keith. You got lucky. Do you know what my response is to someone that says I was lucky by starting with a bang with the fourplex? Actually, it's not the response you would expect. My answer, in a sense, is, you know what? You were right. I did get lucky. Why did I get lucky to just have enough to scrape together that 3.5% FHA down payment back in 2002? It's because when I bought, I didn't have the life experience or the big picture wherewithal. What I mean is that where I bought the property, that city, Anchorage, Alaska's economy, would go on to grow and grow every year, year over year, for the next 12 plus years after that, an unbroken streak of economic expansion. But see, when I bought the building, I didn't even think about the fact that the market is more important than the property itself. All I knew was that 3 tenants were already living in the fourplex, and I could move into the vacant unit and collect rent from the other 3. I didn't even have the investor vision to know that that was risky. The Anchorage economy is not diversified. It's so dependent on the price of a barrel of oil. This economy didn't even feel pain during the 2008 Great Recession like other places did either. So I just got lucky. Oil prices continued to stay pretty healthy for a while. That was riskier than I even knew at the time, but I made out, kind of lucked out, and then discovered that there's more risk to only being invested in your own local market than what most people realize. And then I promptly invested in multiple geographic markets. So in a sense, though I took a calculated risk when I began, there was a component of luck to that initial success. I was just kind of blind to the market diversification component. You've got to be invested in multiple markets. We're actually going to talk about that some more, but from a completely fresh perspective, and it includes some rather serious and sad material, but there is going to be one huge lesson in this for you. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Finally, Total Control Financial gives you checkbook control of your 401k and IRA money to invest in real estate. It's time to get your retirement money into your own checking account, but you've got to avoid the little-known tax that you'll pay with any self-directed IRA. Instead, it's time for the QRP. Learn more and get your free copy of the QRP book by text messaging QRP in all capital letters to 72,000. For a real estate investor like you seeking an income property loan, go to Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. Over the years, you've heard President Chaley Ridge generously devote her time to you here on the show as a guest. Ridge provides investment property loans in most U.S. states, and you're going to find out how they've helped more people realize their dreams of real estate financial freedom than any other mortgage lender in the entire nation when you get started at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is Richard Duncan, publisher of Macro Watch. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education, where we don't talk about living below your means when you can instead use those same efforts to expand your means. So many people think it's good to live below their means. To some people, financial betterment means that they feel smart by eating a homemade ketchup and mustard sandwich at work because that just saved them $6.20 at lunch. Oh, jeez. When you go grocery shopping, how many times would you have to buy the cheap paper towels to send your child to their college of choice? Nothing. There is no number because that doesn't work. That's a poor mindset. Hey, what are you doing this weekend? I don't know. What are you going to do this weekend? I'm going to go live below my means. Well, yeah, have fun with that. And don't plan on including me. So I think we need to give a name to this recurring character that I make these frugal references to. At work, he spent 9 minutes in the bathroom, and he thinks that that's just great. He's rationalizing that he got paid for those 9 minutes in the workplace bathroom. That person feels like they won. How in the world is spending 9 minutes in the old bathroom getting you any closer to what you really want to do with your life? And how does that 9 minutes help others? I got it. Skip. We're going to call this live below your means guy Skip. Scarce Skip. That totally works because he skips out on picking up the restaurant tab too. Don't be like Skip. A rich person digs for gold and a poor person is concerned with the cost of a shovel. Instead, talk about concepts that move the meter in your life and get you thinking and create housing value for others. Well, maybe I'm just trying really hard to have a light moment with you here because I've got something rather serious to tell you about. This is why I'm answering fewer listener questions than usual today, and it has to do with an earthquake that struck my hometown, rattling nerves and destroying real estate. Now, as you'll see, this has implications and lessons for you just the same, whether you live in a seismically active area of California or Alaska or Japan, or even if you don't, just the same. Anchorage, Alaska's magnitude 7.0 earthquake that struck a couple weeks ago made world and national news, but it seemed to quickly fall out of the news cycle because President George H.W. Bush's death occurred just hours later, and it grabbed more attention. Now, I am not a seismologist, but I've been interviewed by other media sources for my take on how earthquakes affect real estate and your behavior as an investor. Now, luckily, no one was killed in the 2018 Anchorage earthquake. And yes, my wife and I live in Anchorage, Alaska. If you happen to be a new listener, I know that may be difficult to wrap your mind around, but I moved from Pennsylvania to Anchorage more than 15 years ago because I like the quality of life, opportunities for mountaineering, skiing, and yet it's still a city of 300,000 people here in Anchorage, so there are good amenities too. The best real estate investors live wherever they want to live, and they invest where the numbers make sense. Some people don't realize that Alaska has 2 to 3 times the earthquake activity as California, and it's also the most seismically active part of the entire North American continent, notwithstanding smaller magnitude events as a result of fracking elsewhere. The earthquakes I'm talking about are the result of natural subterranean tectonic plate movement. The Pacific plate is subducting beneath the North American plate. Huge pieces of real estate moving here. Now, as I tell you about this, note that I am uninsured. I have absolutely zero insurance protection against earthquake damage, even though I'm a real estate guy. This earthquake struck just 10 miles north of the city and our home. When it struck, and it rattled for more than a minute, only 10 miles away, and I was home alone, the house shook so much that first I got scared, and then a couple seconds later is really what it takes until I realize what is happening. And my next thought is that, my gosh, the house is shaking so violently and I am not in control. I am just not in control at all of whatever happens next. Soon, I was thinking about how never in my life have I felt this much violent side-to-side shaking, and that I am right now living through the most violent earthquake I've ever felt. And after what seemed like a minute went by, I heard stuff being knocked off the walls. I knew I was helpless anyway. What I did is I actually stood in my home with both feet put together just to see if the earthquake was strong enough to knock me off my feet. It didn't knock me off my feet, but the worst of the rumbling was over by then. I kept hearing more things fall off the walls and crash and break down on the ground throughout the house, and realized this is Anchorage on November 30th. I had never felt anything like this before, so it seemed totally possible that our home's walls could have split apart. I had no idea. So it's 27 degrees outside Fahrenheit. In Celsius, that's 3 degrees below freezing, and there's snow on the ground. Well, my wife was across town, and I made sure she was all right. Then I looked around the home and realized that, well, walls weren't cracked, and doors and windows seemed to open and shut okay, and quickly checking, I did still have heat and power and even water. Well, a 2006 built home, built to some seismic construction standard, gave me faith in modern engineering. But just a few minutes later, a substantial aftershock hit us. Of course, I didn't know it was an aftershock at the time. I thought it might be bigger than the first quake. You just have no idea what that's going to develop into. And by now, I just felt really dispirited. I was vulnerable, I was small, and I was helpless. And I realized again, I have so little control here. There's just nothing I can really do other than protect my own body. And then I start to think about my local apartment buildings. Many of them were built in the 1960s and 70s, fearing that they probably did not do so well. And next, the hits just keep on coming. A tsunami warning popped up on my phone. Remember, Anchorage is a sea level city. Unpredictable aftershocks of different magnitudes continued in the hours and the days after the main event. The tsunami warning was soon called off. That was nothing there. Soon, I'd learned that there was severe damage to a lot of buildings in the area and a lot of highway overpasses. Some highway sections had collapsed. Some highways had just shut down completely. Schools were closed. Some schools needed to be shut down for the entire school year due to the damage. The railroad had to suspend all of their operations. The famous Trans-Alaska oil pipeline was shut down. Most Anchorage television stations were knocked off the air. Facebook actually became my best news source. And then interestingly, when I checked my Gmail, the tsunami warning had appeared in there with the red banner across the top of my inbox. So Google seems to be integrated with emergency authority. Well, once my family and friends were accounted for, I start thinking about my Anchorage apartment building tenants. My property manager started telling me that things didn't look too bad in some property that they had checked, but I wanted to get involved. I drove to a 9-unit building of mine in Midtown Anchorage. It looked fine from outside, and then inside there were just some superficial cracks, non-structural cracks in the walls, and the residents really didn't seem too rattled by the time that I got there. Now, there were so many water main breaks across the city that the local water authority suggested that residents boil their water because something exogenous could have gotten into the system. And at this particular apartment of mine that I visited, residents were boiling their water, and I informed them that their water comes from an on-site water well, not the municipal system. And a lot of tenants had lived there for a while, and they just never even knew that they were on a well until I had told them. So with the passage of a few more days and the time we had mostly sweeping up broken knickknacks at home and trying to pull things back together, soon I'd learned that the only substantial damage in any of my buildings is a lot of superficial cracking in a 3-story building that I have in an Anchorage suburb. So, it's maybe $10,000 or $15,000 in total damage to repair, and I feel lucky for all of the shaking that occurred to only be out of pocket that small amount on several $1 million worth of local property. On Twitter, President Trump wrote, "To the great people of Alaska, you have been hit hard by a big one. Please follow the directions of the highly trained professionals who are there to help you. Your federal government will spare no expense. God bless you all." Now, I really wish we had an audio soundbite to play for that, but I believe he only tweeted it. Well, Why do I feel lucky then? It sounds like an awful ordeal to experience. In fact, we still have aftershocks here weeks later. It's because Anchorage has potential for way more earthquake destruction. In fact, a 1964 earthquake in the area registered 9.2 on the Richter scale, and it's a logarithmic scale. So 9.2, that is more than 100 times the magnitude of the recent 7.0 event that I've been describing here. That 1964 event was the worst earthquake in the history of the entire continent, full of fatalities, obliterating sea level communities, and it triggered a tsunami so destructive that it even caused damage in Hawaii and Japan. Yes, 9.2, not a movie, but reality. And that shaking lasted nearly 5 full minutes. So that's what I mean when I say it can be way worse. So back to the present day, with all of this seismic activity, then why don't I have my real estate insured against earthquakes? I own tens of thousands of square feet of real estate in and across Anchorage, and it's all 100% completely uninsured against earthquakes, even though earthquake insurance is available to me. Well, first of all, let me tell you this. The main reason that I still own Anchorage real estate is for the advantageous in-state financing programs that I cannot get anywhere else. And I'll tell you why I don't have earthquake insurance and why I won't buy it in the future either. And it's essentially a risk versus reward situation. First of all, earthquake insurance is not part of homeowners insurance, or in the case of rentals, it's not part of landlord's insurance either. It's a separate standalone catastrophic policy. The premiums are somewhat expensive. For a $500,000 primary residence, your home, it would cost about $1,750 per year just for the earthquake policy, and that's on top of a homeowner's policy. Now, I could afford that, but there is more to this. In the case of rentals, some positively cash flowing buildings might go negative with an earthquake insurance policy, but here's the thing. Your deductible amount is often 10%, even 20% of the property value with these earthquake policies. Yes, so if your house is insured for $500,000, then your deductible is $50,000 to $100,000. So even if you ever made a claim, you'd still come out of pocket $50,000 to $100,000 before your insurer would begin to pay anything. It's estimated that fewer than 10% of Anchorage residents carry these policies. And importantly, your lien holder, mortgage companies, they do not require earthquake insurance at all. Well, here's what happened next. A few days after the recent 7.0 earthquake, I predicted this. The governor of Alaska declared a disaster, so you can apply for grant relief. You can apply for grant relief. Grant programs make earthquake insurance an even worse idea. I'm not sure what the people that already have earthquake insurance with a high deductible will do with the grant relief. It's still unfolding here. Now, and this plays into the big real estate lesson for you. Even if you don't live in a seismically active area, you might know I was going to say this. Yes, I strategically maintain low equity positions in all of these properties, say 20% or less. If my damages were worse, the risk could transfer onto the bank and away from me. The bank is the one with 80% skin in the game in these properties. I've got 20%. This way, even if the properties were flattened, if we had a 1964-esque event, the bank is going to be an enthusiastic aid in my financial health. They will advocate on my behalf with insurers and with the grant administrators. And why is that? Because the risk is on the bank. Now, yes, there are more complex issues of LLCs and recourse loans, but let's just keep the discussion simple here. Low equity positions locally, that also means I have more equity that I can use to diversify into multiple geographic markets. So I can own property from Alaska to Texas to Florida to Panama and beyond. That's the big real estate lesson here. Even if you don't have earthquakes, even if you don't have any natural disasters of any kind where you live at all, no hurricanes or tornadoes or anything else, low equity positions in diversification hedge you against things other than just natural disasters. That can hedge you against regional recessions, local recessions. That can hedge you against state government policy change, and a lot more. Just think about, remember a decade ago, Arizona's income property industry had an overnight change when illegals became policed differently there. So there are all kinds of risks, both seen and unforeseen, of only being invested in one market. So there really are, I think, about 5 key lessons for you here. Be invested in multiple markets for diversification. Earthquake insurance is often a waste of your money. As I've often said, home equity is unsafe, illiquid, and its rate of return is always zero. Don't discount renting your own home. Renting your own home makes more sense than what society deems. Low equity positions mean that you can own more property with the same amount of equity, and low equity means high leverage ratios. With positive cash flow, leverage creates wealth, compound interest does not. So those are the real lessons here. The earthquake rattled my wife and I's nerves, and it still does with each aftershock. My investing strategy was not rattled at all. In fact, it might be the only thing that Anchorage's terrible earthquake solidified. They are the lessons. If I can leave you with something positive with this earthquake and give you some paradigm-shifting perspective and appreciation, just look at recent world earthquakes with about the same magnitude as Anchorage's 7.0. Consider this. In 2011, New Zealand's earthquake resulted in 160 deaths, and they're a fairly developed nation. In 2009, Italy had a quake of similar magnitude, 309 deaths there. Earlier in 2018, Indonesia, they suffered 460 deaths from an earthquake of similar magnitude. In 2010, Haiti also had a 7.0 event. It resulted in 230,000 deaths. That is not an error. What a tragedy. Here's my point. In 2018, Anchorage, USA had a 7.0 event. It resulted in 0 deaths, absolutely 0 in and around Anchorage. That is a tribute to engineering and construction right there. So if you are in any of those fields, thank you for helping to keep your neighbor and me safe. Next week on the show, 2 podcast hosts question and push back against my financially free beats debt-free platform. It's going to make for a great discussion. Early next year, we're stacked with a great lineup of both material and feature guests here on the show, as renowned financial commentator and legendary investor Jim Rogers will join us on Get Rich Education remotely from Singapore. Other notable guests include the return of the Wealth Factory's Garrett Gunderson, the return of Rich Dad Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki, that'll be his 3rd appearance here, and so much more. If you learned anything today, you learned about the risk of being invested in only one market and the value of being invested in multiple markets. You can find top turnkey properties with experienced providers in a bunch of different investor advantage metro areas, most in the United States, at a resource that I wish I had available to me when I started investing. You can learn about that at greturnkey.com. I'm Keith Weinhold, and I look forward to enthusiastically building your wealth with you again next week. Invest in multiple markets and don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
As America's 3rd largest city, Chicago, Illinois has big economies of scale for real estate investors. But there are problems with investing in highly taxed, fiscally strapped Illinois. You can beat it when you invest in Chicago land, staying on the Indiana side of the state line. Your property tax on a median Indiana home is less than half that of an Illinois property. Forbes ranks Indiana as one of the top 10 states to do business. With typical rents at $1,250 and purchase prices at $125K, Northwest Indiana numbers work. Learn more and connect with the turnkey provider at getricheducation.com/Chicago. That's GetRichEducation.com/Chicago.
71% of Americans aren't saving enough for retirement. It's going to get worse as people live longer, and you need to start thinking differently. But you can't lose your time. Real estate is the investment vehicle that's made more ordinary people wealthy than anything else. Keith Weinhold of Get Rich Education is host of one of America's top investing shows, Disrupting Wall Street. He's an international best-selling author, a writer for Rich Dad Advisors, and has been an active income property investor since 2002. He has created thousands in passive monthly income for countless followers, and now he has a free book, The 7 Principles for Creating Wealth in Your Life. Get your copy now at GetRichEducation.com/book. That's GetRichEducation.com/book. Because invest in what produces income for you now and later. Sign up now at GetRichEducation.com/book.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.